The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those knuckleheads of liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're coming at you on February 6, 2023. We have a special show for you today, part of our series on libertarians in public office. And so we're going to be going into Iowa today to talk with Dr. Thomas Laehn, who is the Greene County attorney. James, our invisible hand, can you bring up the visual? I just wanted to let people know exactly what we're talking about. So we're going to Iowa today to talk with Thomas, and you can see here that's right smack in the middle of the country. So it'd be a great perspective to get from Thomas. Thomas has been he is the he is the Greene County attorney, and so here is the page where you can find out a little bit more about him. He is also an author.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much for having me this morning. Yeah, I grew up in a little town called Allison, Iowa, arguably the most rural county in the state of Iowa, Butler County, Iowa. It's the only county left in the state without a single stoplight. That's the one claim to fame for Allison, Iowa, and Butler County. It was the county seat with 1,000 people, but then left the state for 10 years, got a master's degree and PhD in political science, was a visiting research fellow at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, before teaching at a little public university down in Louisiana, McNeese State University in Lake Charles, Louisiana, where I taught courses in political philosophy, American politics, and constitutional law. But I wanted to get back to rural Iowa, and I thought law school would be a good path back to rural Iowa, whereas nationwide there's a surfeit of attorneys. There's more attorneys graduating from law school than there are jobs. There's a real shortage in the rural areas of our country. And so I knew if I went to law school, there would be job prospects in rural Iowa, and stars aligned. I graduated law school and almost immediately thereafter ran for Greene County attorney. Most states call it district attorney. In Iowa, we call it a county attorney. Ran and won as a libertarian, making me the only libertarian to hold an elective partisan office in the state of Iowa. Wow. And I was recently reelected this last November. I'm still the only libertarian to hold an elective partisan office in the state of Iowa. So my election 5 years ago wasn't the cutting edge of the overthrow of the two-party system that I envisioned, but I'm still very, very proud to serve the people of Greene County as their county attorney, but also as a libertarian.
So what does the county attorney do? I mean, what is your job?
I wear two hats. First, I'm responsible for prosecuting all crime that occurs within the four corners of the county. No crime can be prosecuted, no one can be indicted in Greene County unless I approve that indictment and proceed with the prosecution. And then my office is responsible for prosecuting the case. Secondly, I am the county's attorney. So anytime the county is buying or selling property, anytime the county is entering into a contract, I serve as the county's attorney and provide the other elected officials in the county with legal advice.
If the county is sued, do you act as their attorney also?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
As a libertarian, how do you bring the philosophy to office? Is that something where you see things slightly different than if it were, say, a Republican there in Iowa?
The short answer is yes. On a day-to-day basis, probably not. Being a prosecutor requires good judgment, and I think that's not necessarily a partisan affair. It's just a matter of whether or not a person has good judgment. There have been times, however, where my understanding of the Constitution, my understanding of the fragility of our constitutional system has definitely had an effect on how I've conducted myself in office. Just one example, the one issue that got me some notoriety and press coverage in Iowa was the stance I took on Biden's vaccine mandate, which from the very beginning I said was unconstitutional, and I said I would refuse to implement it in Greene County. The mandate purported to apply to any employer who had more than 100 employees, which would have included Greene County. We have more than 100 employees working for Greene County. And under the mandate, we were facing huge fines, at least $13,000 per violation, up to $130,000 per violation, which could be construed as meaning per employee per week. And the federal government was saying that if we didn't follow this mandate, they would essentially bankrupt the county. It was just shocking to me that the federal government would basically wage war on another layer of government. And I believed it was absolutely unconstitutional and made a very strong stand that I would resign from office before I would play a role in the implementation of that mandate.
That's awesome. I know on the private side of things, the groups like the Daily Wire and others stood up to that and I guess challenged them in court. So did you actually have to challenge them in court, or did it just sort of blow over, at some point?
So I was in conversation with some other county attorneys in the state, and we contemplated joining the litigation. As far as I know, I'm the only county attorney who actually took a public stand. But there were conversations behind the scenes about engaging in that litigation. The state of Iowa joined the litigation, and we basically decided it was best to kind of piggyback off of that, not to expend county resources, to duplicate efforts. Although if we thought we could add something beyond the arguments being made by the state, I think it's something we would have pursued.
Mm. Well, just curious too, one of the questions I sort of threw it in at the beginning, but it's one of these things we always like to ask our guests because it's how somebody sort of discovered these ideas in liberty is not the same for everybody. We certainly don't get it from our public education. That's so because of that, it's one of those things we like to share with our audience so that they can kind of hear what your journey was to liberty. Was it just through higher education, or did you find out this about somewhere else?
No, it really was through my study and training in political science. I had the great privilege of spending roughly 8 years of my life reading and studying and teaching the political philosophy, the ideas underlying our system of government. I studied philosophy and history and really developed an appreciation for a number of things. One, how fragile our constitutional system really is and how anomalous free societies are in world history. That what we've inherited is really quite special, especially comparing the history of America to the history of ancient Rome, which was really the focus of my studies as an academic. How Rome had this historical evolution from tyranny to a republic and then back to tyranny. And I really believe that we're on that same historical arc, that we overthrew a king to establish a free government, which one would have to go back literally centuries in the Western world to find free government. And now I fear we're back on that descent toward tyranny. And I'm not an alarmist. I'm actually a very moderate in my worldview and my philosophy and my ideas. But my objective reading of history and my objective kind of awareness of what's happening in our country today really leads me to the conclusion that we are tending back toward a tyranny in the United States.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting, but the practical effect of your work as an elected official. I mean, where do you draw your lines in terms of the compromising of your principles to get stuff done? I mean, politics is the art of compromising, and sometimes those compromises are not good for the voters or for taxpayers. But where do you draw your lines? How do you as a libertarian manage your principles versus the practicality of your job?
It's a fantastic question. And it comes down to the rule of law. I swore an oath to defend the Constitution when I assumed office. And the reason I took the stand I did on the vaccine mandate was because I believed that executive unilateral action violated the Constitution, and I could not violate my oath of office. Now, there are other issues where I have to enforce laws that I disagree with. The great example being that in Iowa, the personal use of marijuana is still illegal. Now, as a matter of public policy, I think that's bad public policy. I think we should decriminalize the use of controlled substances in Iowa, especially marijuana. But every day of the week, I'm prosecuting someone for using marijuana. Now, I disagree with that philosophically. And I think I do have room during plea negotiations to exercise discretion regarding what I think is the appropriate punishment in those cases. And there's room for different county attorneys to exercise that discretion differently and still be reasonable. But I am enforcing laws every day that philosophically I disagree with, but I don't believe they're unconstitutional. I believe they came through the legislature in Iowa. I believe the state of Iowa has constitutional authority to enact those laws. So there is room for compromise, for engaging in activities that in the best of all possible worlds I wouldn't be doing. But the line for me, the line in the sand I will not cross is the rule of law and the Constitution.
So do you believe the federal Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, is a quote unquote libertarian document per se?
Yes, I've never quite said it that way. I believe that the libertarian worldview is most consistent with the Constitution of libertarians. Their understanding of the law and of good public policy is more consistent with the Constitution than, say, Democrats or Republicans.
Okay. Just curious, as a libertarian in that office, are you able to sort of promote these ideas within your town of liberty and maybe farther throughout the state at this point? Have you been able to make a difference in that way?
I think so. I mean, my hope is that I've in some ways legitimized the Libertarian Party and lent credibility to it, that I can articulate what we stand for, that I can hold office and manage an office and be a good lawyer, good attorney for the county while being a libertarian. I also have some limited ability, speaking engagements, whether it be with a Rotary Club or a Kiwanis Club, to talk about my views and what I've done as county attorney. So yes, but I am only a county official, so I don't have a very large stage. But to the extent that I'm able, yes.
So it is clear that Iowa is increasingly moving rightward, shall we say, moving red, shall we say? That is a true statement, is it not?
Yes, we've gone from a kind of a battleground state to a solidly Republican state.
So how is that affecting you as in your job as county attorney?
In a couple of ways. One, this might go back to your previous question. If I were just about kind of making the necessary compromises to get ahead, I should have run as a Republican, because this is a solidly Republican county, and it kind of was an unnecessary risk to run as a libertarian, but I just, in good conscience, couldn't do it. I am actually very concerned about the concentration of power in Des Moines, in our state capital. We have a Republican trifecta. They control the governor's office, the House, and the Senate. And what I've really learned about the two major parties is that they're virtually identical in all important respects. The very essence of a political party, the goal, the raison d'etre of a political party, is to concentrate power. Our founding fathers wanted to fragment power, to distribute power across branches of government, across layers of government, because they knew that the concentration of power allowed for the arbitrary exercise of power, which is the antithesis of liberty. And whether Republicans gain control or Democrats is the same objective. The underlying goal before they enact any policy legislation is to concentrate power. And we see that in Iowa. I mean, no legislature in the history of our state has done more to strip local decision makers of their discretion than this Republican administration and Republican legislature. The party that purports to be in support of local government has done more than any other in the history of our state to destroy local government. Which is just is ironic, but it really reveals the true nature and essence of every political party.
You know, Thomas, just secondly, I just wanted to jump in on that. And this it goes back to your discussion earlier about that arc of going from king to liberty back to king again. It kind of almost makes me think of the Republicans as the analogy in that Lord of the Rings, I guess, at the beginning, where they get the ring and it's like, what can we do with it? Throw it away. No, we should use this. So, and then right back toward, tyranny again. So, I don't know, just an observation.
But Thomas, could you give us an example of just a quick example of what you call the destruction of the authority of local governments?
Yeah, I'll give two very quick examples. First, in 2021, Senate File 413 was the state's new voting legislation, elections legislation. Previously, each county auditor had a lot of discretion to run each county's election. And the state came in and is now really micromanaging elections at the local level in ways that are just absurd. So, for instance, if we have a ballot drop box where voters drop their ballots in a box that's not attended by an elections employee, that ballot box now must be under video surveillance 24/7 and must be emptied 4 times a day, 7 days a week. And then what really kind of rubs me the wrong way is that if our county auditor fails to empty that ballot box 4 times a day, including Sundays, she's facing a D felony and up to 5 years in prison for not emptying a ballot box the 4th time on a Sunday. I mean, that sort of micromanagement from the state level is just preposterous. Also, county auditors used to have discretion to have satellite voting places where individuals wouldn't have to come to the county courthouse to vote. They could go to little community centers or churches or whatever around the county to vote. And the auditor had independent discretion to set up those satellite voting places. Now, the auditor can't do that unless there's a petition first from the people of the county to set up a satellite voting booth, which just make why the state wants to intervene and create all of these regulations and interfere with local decision making is really bothersome to me. Yeah. And then right now, the second example I would give very quickly, there's proposed legislation, again from the governor, that would allow the state attorney general to override a local prosecutor's decision about whether or not to prosecute a case. That's House Study Bill 126, currently pending before the legislature. It has always been the case in Iowa that the county attorney has the final say on whether or not to indict someone for a crime. Right. The governor wants to take away that discretion, where anytime the attorney general disagrees with the county attorney, the attorney general can step in and take over the case, which again, is about the centralization of power. It's about punishing county attorneys whose philosophies don't align with the political philosophy of the governor. And it really will hamper my ability to ensure that the law is being enforced in Greene County in a manner that's consistent with the values and beliefs of the people of Greene County.
Wow, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Let me ask you on a slightly different topic, but related to the issue of liberty. I know just recently your governor just signed into law something like a school choice program that's probably universal throughout the state Do you think that's a step towards liberty or a step away from liberty?
That's a great question, and I assume this is an issue that divides libertarians. I mean, one of the things I love about being a libertarian is there's a lot of really informed debate and conversation that occurs within the party. My position, not speaking on behalf of the Libertarian Party here in Iowa, my position is that this is bad legislation. The price tag is enormous. We're $250 million a year. It's essentially a voucher program. Any parent, regardless of income, can get a voucher for a significant amount of money, roughly in the ballpark of $7,500 a year, give or take. That they get money from the state government to pay the tuition, but also books, school uniforms, whatever the costs may be associated with sending their kid to a private school. Now, I understand a lot of the frustration in Iowa with our current education system. But this is, I think, a poor use of public money. I mean, it's growing government. Again, the Republican Party, which purports to be the party of small government, is here after 2 weeks of deliberation. This was in the legislature for 2 weeks before the legislature enacted it and the governor signed it. It was rushed through the legislature. And so, for instance, I know my wife and I are exploring a private school for our daughter, who's 4, and we're thinking ahead to what we want to do for her education. And the private school we're looking at charges tuition around $4,000, $4,500 a year. That's it. Cost of living is pretty low in rural Iowa. Well, that school now has no reason not to increase their tuition to $7,500 a year. I mean, why wouldn't they? The legislature has promised to pay up to $7,500 in tuition. So it is not promoting the free market. In fact, it's releasing private schools from free market forces and is a massive government program. And I think there's a lot of flaws. So there's no public transportation for these private schools. So the only kids who are going to benefit are those who live nearby a private school or those whose parents can afford to drive their kid a county or two over for a private school. So I think is not well thought through. I think it's hugely expensive. And I don't think it's good for public education. It's not good for public education. It's going to be taking money away from our public schools and redirecting them to private schools. So I have a number of objections to the legislation.
Well, Thomas, that's kind of interesting because we actually had another libertarian on the show a few weeks back who's a school board member in, I believe it's in Nebraska, Cole
Yes.
Brodeen. And one of his concerns with school choice was that he didn't have any sort of broader market concerns, like you're saying, other than the fact that in a small area like his, there just wouldn't be any ways to, you only have maybe 30 kids in a graduating class, and when you had that, dividing the resources he thought might be a challenge. So it's interesting to hear these perspectives. But one of the things I wanted to get to you before we're done too is the challenges you faced running for office, because you talk about this being a red state and the fact that there was more risk running for you as a libertarian. Did you face hurdles, and what was the help? Did you get help from the Libertarian Party as well in your bid?
The biggest hurdle was the threat from the Republican Party, which certain Republican officials made explicit, that I should run as a Republican or expect a challenger. And that challenger would get, 40% of the vote just in virtue of having the R next to his or her name. And so that was the real hurdle, was convincing people to vote for me, even though I wasn't a Republican. And I think, in retrospect, I think those fears maybe were exaggerated. I have found that in Iowa in particular, even though the Republican Party is ascendant, at any given point in time, a plurality of Iowans are actually registered third party or independent. So there's more Republicans than Democrats, but actually there's more people who are fed up with the two-party system than there are Republicans or Democrats. But that was the real risk, was running as a libertarian when I think people had a kind of a positive connotation to what it was to be a libertarian, but they really didn't know what we stood for. And to kind of help present myself to the public, explain what I stood for, that was the biggest hurdle. I got a lot of moral support from the Libertarian Party. I did not get any funding or financial support from the Libertarian Party.
Okay. And I guess this does bring up the question too, do you have sights for future office beyond Greene County Attorney in Iowa, or is this sort of a, thing where you want to stay in law, or do you have political sights farther than that in the future?
The honest answer is I don't know. I just won re-election. From day one, I told my supporters in the community I was planning to run for 2 terms, and then I was going to reevaluate things. And that's something my wife and I are already doing. I think that there's a lot of options, possibly running for a different office, possibly going back to academia and teaching, or maybe running for re-election as county attorney. Kind of everything's on the table right now as my wife and I decide kind of what's best for our family and kind of explore what the future might hold.
We're almost to the end of the show, and I guess there's one real quick question I wanted to ask you, just because you had a successful run and you didn't get much funding. Any thoughts on roughly, if somebody were thinking of running for a similar thing, how much roughly would they have to spend out of pocket themselves? And any last thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with at the end of the show?
Sure. I would really encourage anyone considering running for a local office as a libertarian to run. I think the only way the Libertarian Party will ever be successful is if we have a 2-pronged approach where we are fielding candidates at the local level who can gain experience and maybe start working their way up to higher office. But also we need to be running candidates for president and governor, Senate, so that we have that name recognition and that visibility more generally, even though if at this time those candidates' prospects are dismal. I think to run for a local office, you don't need a lot of money. You will need to invest some money up front. I think, initially my wife and I made, the amount of money we contributed up front to my campaign was in the hundreds of dollars, not in the thousands. But then we did some aggressive fundraising. We really aggressively went out, spoke to groups, requested money, and we raised quite a bit of money that way. But I think at a local race, especially in a rural area, a person can get elected without being rich. It's definitely doable.
Well, thanks. And in that note, I think we're going to have to let it go, but that's a great point to make that, hey, this is accessible to a lot of people if you're interested in trying this. But thanks so much again, Thomas, for joining us. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you at the next one. Until then, stay free.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always.